The shocking reason why black people wash their legs and white people don't. Scope News presents. Picture this. A white man steps out of the shower, water still dripping down his calves. He grabs a towel, dries off, and goes about his day. He never touched his legs, never bent down to wash his feet, never once thought it was odd. In his mind, the soap from his armpits, chest, and hair dripped down far enough. The water gets there, he shrugs. It's clean enough. That's not just a personal habit, that's cultural conditioning. Now picture this. A black grandmother standing in a steamy bathroom. She's bent over a tub, scrubbing her grandchild's legs with a stiff cloth and homemade soap, moving with purpose, pressure, and pride. The child winces, not because it hurts, but because this is what being loved feels like. Being scrubbed down until you glisten, until your skin stings from care, until you are seen. These two moments exist side by side in America. One taught that rinsing is enough. The other taught that survival means scrubbing off every trace of the day, the dirt, the history. What started as an internet debate, do you wash your legs in the shower, spiraled into a cultural reckoning.
I talked about how I don't wash my legs every time I take a shower, and I got caught hell for that.
Black users, appalled by what they were seeing on social media, watched as white users proudly confessed they'd never touched their legs in the shower, never used a washcloth.
So your unpopular opinion is you don't need to wash your legs?
Don't need to wash my legs.
Some had never even washed their feet on purpose. And this wasn't an isolated opinion. It was widespread, celebrated even, laughed about. But here's what no one's saying. This isn't just about personal hygiene. It's historical. It's racial. And it's rooted in generations of deeply embedded contradictions about who is allowed to be clean and who is assumed to be dirty. European settlers were some of the filthiest colonizers in world history. That's not an insult. That's a historical fact. In 17th century Europe, people didn't bathe daily or even weekly. Soap was expensive, water was feared. Many believed that soaking in water could open the skin to illness. Instead of washing, they doused themselves in perfumes, powders, and layered clothing. In medieval cities, waste was thrown from windows. Bathing was associated with disease or sin. Cleanliness, ironically, was seen as unnatural. So when those same people landed on native land, in what's now called North America, they brought more than just weapons and religion. They brought germs, plague, and hygiene habits that horrified the indigenous people they encountered. Native Americans, by contrast, bathed regularly. They used rivers, herbs, and spiritual rituals to cleanse themselves. Cleanliness was not a luxury, it was part of life. The Native Americans were in fact the ones who taught them how to bathe. That was ironic within itself. And yet, despite their own filth, white settlers labeled the people they met as savages. They claimed superiority while carrying lice, smallpox, and filth. In one of the most disturbing and well-documented cases of biological warfare in early America, British Commander Lord Geoffrey Amherst suggested infecting native communities with smallpox via blankets taken from diseased patients. Those blankets weren't just infected, they were filthy, given to people who'd never stopped bathing even when colonizers tried to strip them of everything. And that kind of weaponized disease wasn't just physical, it was psychological. It planted the narrative that white bodies were clean by default, and everyone else's was not. When enslaved Africans were brought to this land, the contradiction deepened. These were people who came from cultures with rich traditions of cleanliness, herbal medicine, spiritual bathing, and grooming. Water was sacred in many African societies. People bathed daily with sponges made from vines and loofah, scrubbed with ash, brushed their teeth with sticks, and oiled their bodies to protect the skin from the sun. But once enslaved, their access to these traditions was violently ripped away. Inside slave ships, they were chained shoulder to shoulder in their own waste for weeks. Many died without ever being allowed to clean themselves. Once they arrived in the Americas, enslaved people were forced to live in cabins with no ventilation, no soap, no shoes, and no sanitation. Skin infections, lice, and parasites were rampant. But the worst part? They were then blamed for it, called dirty, filthy, subhuman. White slave owners would perfume enslaved people for auctions, scrubbing them not for their health, but for profit. A clean black body was a more valuable one until it was sold. Then hygiene was denied again. And when enslaved people found ways to clean themselves anyway, using leftover soap scraps, rags, or even sand and cornmeal, they weren't praised. They were punished. Their cleanliness wasn't considered discipline, it was ignored. And despite their own limitations, they were the ones that bathed the slave master's children. That knowledge did not just come out of nowhere. They already had those cleanliness standards prior to enslavement, and yet they continued, they passed it down. A child growing up during Reconstruction in Mississippi learned to wash every inch of her skin with lye soap and a cloth so rough it left marks. Her mother had been born in slavery. Her father was a field hand who taught her that scrubbing your feet was the difference between life and infection. That child grew into a woman who taught her own children, always wash your legs, your feet, your behind. No part is too low for your attention. Even if the world looks away, you do not. That's the cultural difference. For Black families, cleanliness wasn't just a goal, it was protection. You had to be twice as clean to be seen as half as good. And that message sank in deep. Whole generations came up being told not to smell bad in front of white folks because being seen as dirty was dangerous. You could be arrested, refuse service, beaten, or worse. So yes, using washcloths is a must. Not washing legs would never be an option. This was rooted in survival. Now compare that to the luxury of white casualness, of being able to say on camera, I don't need to wash my legs, the water runs down, and no one bats an eye. It's not just the freedom to be lazy, it's the freedom to not be judged. That's what this really comes down to, the racial privilege of default cleanliness. The leg washing conversation became a meme, but for Black communities, it struck a nerve. It was a reminder that the same people who once refused to bathe, who brought disease, who sprayed perfume over rot, still get to laugh about not using a washcloth. Still get to act shocked that someone might scrub their legs. Still get to reduce ancestral rituals to a punchline. Some people online called it just a joke. But when something has been a symbol of survival for over 400 years, it's not funny. Because when Black people talk about hygiene, we're not just talking about soap. We're talking about inherited trauma, about proving our humanity, about refusing to let society strip us of dignity, even when it stripped us of everything else. Washing your legs is about more than hygiene. It's about care, about pride, about saying, my body is worth the effort. That's something enslaved people had to whisper to themselves in the dark while scrubbing in secret. That's something grandmothers taught with their hands, not their words. That's something we still carry. So if social media is just now realizing that some people don't wash their legs, maybe it's time we stop laughing and start learning. Scope News tells the truth. Here are the facts. Historical research for this report includes sources from the Smithsonian Institution on Hygiene and Racial History, documented records from the transatlantic slave trade, and preserved writings from the Colonial Williamsburg Foundation on bathing habits in early America. Additional cultural commentary provided by Black historians, oral traditions from formerly enslaved descendants, and archival footage of viral social media reactions. Legal disclaimer. This Scope News report is intended for educational, informational, and cultural commentary purposes. It draws from oral history, cultural tradition, archival research, and social analysis. Viewer discretion is advised. While every effort has been made to present historically accurate and respectful information, the content explores sensitive topics including slavery, racism, and systemic injustice. This report does not substitute for professional, academic, legal, or medical consultation. Thank you for watching Scope News.